Singapore shockwaves. Talks are expected to resume next week, one day after a historic summit. We have reaction. Across the border, our look at immigration from Mexico begins with an interview with the leader of the largest Catholic diocese in the world. Vatican reforms. We examine recent recommendations to Pope Francis about changes in the Church's government. And heaven and hello. Why two groups of Catholic nuns in Ohio recorded a parody of a hit song from 2015. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, June 13th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The American bishops make a passionate plea as Congress works on reforming immigration policy. Separating mothers and their babies is not the answer, they say. While protecting the border is important, the Catholic leaders say we must do better. Their call to action comes as our Lauren Ashburn reports from Mexico City, where she's seen firsthand what migrants go through and how the Church is helping them. Lauren?
Wyatt, the Archdiocese of Mexico City is the world's largest diocese, serving more than 7 million Catholics. Leading it is 68-year-old Cardinal Carlos Aguiar Retes. He is from Tepic, Mexico, and for 6 years served as the president of the Episcopal Conference of Mexico. Pope Francis then promoted him to cardinal in 2016, named him Archbishop of Mexico City in December. In an exclusive interview with EWTN News Nightly, he shared his perspective on immigration. Bienvenidos a EWTN, Cardinal Don Carlos Aguiar.
Mucho gusto, es un placer estar con ustedes hoy.
Gracias, gracias. In 2007, you and Cardinal Bergoglio, now Pope Francis, wrote a document on the evangelization in the Americas. It called for prioritizing people on the edges of society. Does this include undocumented immigrants?
Fundamentalmente,
Christ came to help the suffering, the marginalized, those who are excluded. He came to help those who society abandons. He brings a message of redemption, of restoration, of transformation.
Y la Iglesia, que prolonga la presencia.
And the Church, which maintains the presence of Christ in the world, must follow the examples of giving the needy a hand, giving them back their dignity as human beings.
Volvió a dar la dignidad de ser humanos.
President Trump continues his pledge to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico and to make Mexico pay for it. What is your opinion about that?
No es al vecino.
You can ask your neighborhood to build you a house? That is ridiculous. I think President Trump is wrong to insist that Mexico help the most powerful country in the world. It doesn't make sense to ask Mexico, a country that has so many problems, for help. On top of our own problems, we are being asked to do a favor to a powerful country.
President Trump thinks that Mexico should stop the undocumented immigrants from coming to the U.S.
Mexico is doing his part. Mexico is growing and developing. But you can solve serious problems in a short period of time. That is a fantasy. To solve a serious problem, we need time and long-term outlook.
What is the Church in Mexico doing to help these immigrants?
We are responding for immediate needs of migrants. We have to do that. From our southern border all the way up north. We have houses for immigrants. We give them food and place to sleep. This is one concrete step, so that we never look at immigrants as merely as delinquents, but as human beings.
But all of those seeking asylum aren't just undocumented immigrants leaving persecution. They're also drug lords, terrorists. How do we know the difference?
There has to be clear distinction made between the migrants seeking a better life and the migrants who leave the country to work for drug cartels. Secondly, the United States owns a lot to Mexico. Mexico doesn't produce arms. We don't have an arms industry. Where do the guns that the drug cartels operate with come from? The United States. President Trump has refused to address that problems in the United States. For example, look at the school shootings, with a crackdown on the sales of those arms. he needs to stop the sales of guns outside his country if he wants to end the Mexican cartels. It is in his hands.
Está en sus manos.
Cardinal Don Carlos Aguiar, thank you so much for joining us.
Gracias a esta invitación.
Thank you, Lauren. Meanwhile, back at home, Republicans are struggling to pass immigration legislation. House Republicans have agreed to vote on a bill. Speaker Paul Ryan says the compromise has a chance of becoming law. Correspondent Jason Calvi speaks with a Catholic congressman who favors a tough stance. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. For weeks, Republicans have failed to come up to a consensus on immigration. Moderates want a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. Conservatives call that amnesty. Now, Speaker Ryan will bring 2 GOP bills to the floor as early as next week. Representative Walter Jones of North Carolina says the United States cannot reward immigrants who break our laws. Both of these bills are expected to protect those dreamers, the immigrants brought to the country illegally as children. Do you support giving them citizenship?
No, I'm not there yet. I want the bills that we have to vote on to give us an opportunity for amending, pro or con. Too many times leadership tries to bring a bill to the floor, and the only people that know the bill itself are those who brought it to the floor. I am for an open debate on the dreamers. I'm not opposed to having the debate, but all in all, it's either you say that you give them status now or you don't give them status. I think that this whole issue, like other issues, Jason, needs to be analyzed and talked about.
Well, that's interesting because we just heard from the Cardinal Archbishop of Mexico City, and he said this is a problem that's not something you can have a simple solution to. So it sounds like you would agree with the Cardinal on that.
I agree with him on that. I really do. And this is why we don't get anything done, because the leadership won't take the time of having hearings on and talking about the dreamers or talking about the immigration issue. We should have taken the last 4 or 5 months, select committees, analyzing the problem, look at the answers and the challenges.
The bill will also pump millions into President Trump's proposed border wall. Mexico City's Cardinal Archbishop just told our Lauren Ashburn it's not fair to ask Mexico to pay for that. What do you say to him?
No, Mexico shouldn't pay for it, and they're not going to pay for it. The wall, I have never heard anybody, including some of my friends from New Mexico and Texas, say that the wall would be the solution. To me, I'd like to see the artists, the engineers to explain to me and put it on a draft as to how this is going to work. I have no idea really in detail what we're talking about.
So maybe you don't even support the $25 billion to go to
No, we're broke as a nation.
Okay.
When Bill Clinton left office in the year 2000, our debt was $5.6 trillion. Today, as you and I are talking, it's well over $21 trillion.
I know.
Where are we going to get the money from?
I know some Catholics are urging compassion. U.S. bishops are urging compassion on the issue of immigration. When it comes to that issue, how do you balance that with, I know you've called for respecting the law of the land and not allowing amnesty, in your words?
I think, again, to me, the committees of jurisdiction should be holding hearings, then take the bills that have been introduced, go to the committees, discuss the bills in detail. It takes time, there's no question about it, and then have a debate and a vote in the committee and get it to the floor.
You've been Catholic now for about 41 years. How does your faith impact this issue when you've got the U.S. bishops right now debating how Catholics can make sense of this divisive issue?
It does impact me. I am very pro debate on war. I'm a very pro debate on immigration issues. What's wrong with this place is we don't debate. Leadership does what they want to do, put it on the floor, and you vote for it with very little debate.
Is this going to pass?
I don't think so.
These votes as early as next week are important in this midterm election year. Moderate Republicans can celebrate forcing a vote on immigration and trying to protect the Dreamers, while conservatives can say they voted to build President Trump's wall on the Mexican border. Wyatt?
We'll be following all of those developments. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thanks, Jason. And we will continue our special reports on immigration all week long. Lauren Ashburn will be reporting again from Mexico tomorrow and Friday right here on EWTN News Nightly. President Trump is celebrating his historic summit with Kim Jong Un, saying North Korea no longer poses a nuclear threat. But critics remain skeptical, citing the dictator's dismal record of human rights abuses. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump returned to the White House early this morning. He believes his meeting with Kim Jong Un could lead to future prosperity for the North Korean people, who are all too familiar with a history of oppression. President Trump returns to America after making history halfway around the world. The first sitting U.S. president to meet with the leader of North Korea brings this message back home, tweeting, "Just landed, a great trip, but everybody can now feel much safer than the day I took office. There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Meeting with Kim Jong Un was an interesting and very positive experience. North Korea has great potential for the future."
We are not likely to get denuclearization.
Michael Green is the director of Asia Studies at Georgetown University. He worked on President George Bush's National Security Council. Though the agreement signed by President Trump and Kim Jong Un states North Korea commits to work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, Green says they won't be so fast to follow through.
The North Koreans have no incentive to give up nuclear weapons because it's nuclear weapons that get them the international stage and the respect they need and want.
President Trump says if North Korea denuclearizes, then he'll lift U.S. sanctions.
새로운 이야기, 새로운 출발.
He even showed Kim a video of what economic prosperity could look like for North Korea.
Chairman Kim has before him an opportunity like no other to be remembered as the leader who ushered in a glorious new era of security and prosperity for his people.
It would be a sharp turnaround from a country known for its human rights abuses. North Korean defector Sung-Ju Lee tells us he had to live on the street and steal food to stay alive.
My perspective now, it's hell. It's the biggest, North Korea itself is biggest jail in the world.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he's confident that U.S. talks with North Korea will resume sometime in the next week. Wyatt?
Mark, how will the U.S. be able to confirm if North Korea actually gets rid of its nuclear weapons?
It's a question many people are asking. There is no specific language in the agreement signed by both leaders about how denuclearization would be verified. But today, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo did say there will be in-depth verification, and he is hopeful major disarmament will occur in the next couple years. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thanks, Mark. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe files a lawsuit against the Department of Justice. He says the agency is not giving him documents related to his firing in March. McCabe faces a possible criminal probe into whether he intentionally misled internal investigators. The highest-ranking Republican woman in Congress says she's encouraged by the steps her party, along with President Trump, have taken to protect the unborn.
A pro-life justice on the Supreme Court, legislation that has passed the House that is banning abortions after 20 weeks, the Born Alive Protection Act, the Permanent Hyde Amendment, which has been on the books for a long time but had never been made permanent. That means that there will be no federal funding of abortions in America.
Representative McMorris Rodgers speaking at an event hosted by Americans United for Life. Organizer Catherine Glenn Foster says on the state level, an average of 60 pro-life laws have been passed every year since 2011. She says it's moving America closer to one day repealing Roe versus Wade. Wildfires are causing havoc across the western United States. Thousands of people have been forced to flee as the flames scorch tens of thousands of acres. A brush fire outside of Los Angeles is posing a threat to the ritzy area in Southern California.
I hear all these fire engines, I'm thinking, what's going on? And then all of a sudden the helicopter's like right above, and I'm thinking, this is not good. So I looked out the window and there was that big black plume of smoke.
The Portola fire forced dozens of households to evacuate.
It's very complex, heavy brush. These areas have not been burned for many, many years. And we're fortunate now we don't have erratic wind and weather conditions.
Washington State is also dealing with a major blaze. The Soap Lake fire has burned about 2,000 acres. Some residents who evacuated were allowed to return home, but they've been warned they may have to leave again.
Fire season is here, especially here in the Columbia Basin.
Colorado crews have the Buffalo Mountain Fire to deal with.
We called in an aggressive air attack, recognizing a location near two big subdivisions here in the Wilderness and Mesa Cortina area.
Also in Colorado is the 416 fire, which has burned more than 23,000 acres and closed the San Juan National Forest. Another fire we're following in the west, the Ute Park fire in New Mexico, which began in late May. It has burned about 37,000 acres, but is now mostly contained. Italy's Coast Guard brings more than 900 migrants to shore in Sicily, but a diplomatic standoff continues over the country's refusal to let another rescue ship dock. The refugees who reached land are from Sudan, Mali, Ivory Coast, and Guinea. 13 were pregnant and more than 200 were minors. The move comes as another ship with migrants was denied entry into Italy and Malta. That vessel with more than 600 on board is on its way to Spain. Boko Haram militants destroy a building in Nigeria Catholics use for teaching the faith. In all, 22 structures were wrecked by the Islamic militant group Monday. Local media reports security forces killed one attacker in the raid. It is the same part of Nigeria where 2 priests and 16 parishioners were killed in April. Argentina's legislature begins a debate on a measure that would allow elective abortions in the first 14 weeks of pregnancy. It's an issue that has sharply divided the homeland of Pope Francis. Argentina now allows abortions only in cases of rape or risk to a woman's health. The Catholic Church strongly opposes the new measure. Australia's Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull will deliver a national apology to child sex abuse victims in his country. The government just finished its years-long study into abuse. It made numerous recommendations to the Vatican, including a request for priests to break the seal of confession if it involves child endangerment. 2 Vatican investigators who have traveled to Chile are offering to provide a response to each case of clergy sexual abuse there.
A cada caso de abuso sexual de menores cometido por clérigos.
Archbishop Charles Scicluna and Monsignor Jordi Bertomeo also say they are on a mission of healing. They say they want to be a sign of the Pope's closeness to the people and the Church in Chile. The Holy Father on Monday accepted the resignations of 3 Chilean bishops. Coming up, we have an update on the changes proposed to the Vatican central government, a project 5 years in the making. And Pope Francis discusses his favorite sport. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The reform of the Vatican central government is taking shape. It's been 5 years in the making. The Pope's closest advisors, a group of 9 cardinals, will soon present a document to the Holy Father outlining the proposed changes. The cardinals wrapped up their latest meeting today at the Vatican. For more on the proposed reforms, we're joined by Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley, who joins us from Rome. Juliet, what progress has been made in these meetings so far?
Well, the text hasn't been made public as yet because the Holy Father still has to read and analyze it, and he has to decide whether he wants to change it. So the working title, Predicate Evangelium, which is Latin for Proclaim the Gospel, serves as a reminder that all reforms are intended to help the Pope in his work as Vicar of Christ. Now, the big news is that the document that will be the cornerstone of the reform process is almost done, completing one of the biggest jobs Pope Francis took on at the time of his election in 2013. Allow me just to point out that a lot might still change in the document before it's done. We'll have to wait and see, Wyatt.
You mentioned mapping out the goals. What do you think are going to be some of the goals of this reform?
Well, there were 3 main reform criteria: updating the curia, like the creation of new offices to bring it in line with modern times, communications and economics, for instance; strengthening key offices, such as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that safeguards the teachings of the Church; and finally, Wyatt, coordinating the offices so that they work better together.
Well, those are some pretty big goals. So now thinking about that, what can we expect going forward?
Well, economic reform was also discussed. Now, Cardinal Pell, who served as the Vatican finance minister, was not in attendance. As we know, he faces trial on sexual assault charges in Australia. But Monsignor Brian Ferm, Secretary of the Council for the Economy, presented the reform of the financial organizational structure of the Holy See and of the Vatican city-state. Now, he stressed the efforts to improve transparency and modern accounting practices. And finally, Cardinal O'Malley gave an update on the work of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. The cardinals will be meeting again this coming September, Wyatt, for 3 days.
And we'll continue to follow that as they discuss reforms. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
A federal judge in Missouri denies a request by Planned Parenthood to block the state's medical abortion laws. The regulations require abortion providers to obtain written contracts with 2 doctors who have local hospital admitting privileges. The ruling prevents Planned Parenthood from offering medication-induced abortions at 2 of its clinics. Last year was a record-setting one for the Knights of Columbus charitable work. The Catholic group gave more than $185 million in donations in 2017 and provided more than 75 million volunteer hours around the world. The Knights of Columbus is the world's largest Catholic fraternal service organization with nearly 2 million members. The Knights also support EWTN News Nightly. Up next, as the World Cup begins tomorrow in Russia, we have news about the destination of the 2026 tournament and why 2 groups of nuns in Ohio are in tune with each other. The World Cup is coming to the United States. FIFA, the sport's governing body, awards the 2026 Cup to North America, which means games will be played in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. The tournament is held every 4 years and is the most-watched sporting event in the world. The U.S. last hosted it in 1994. For Mexico, it was 1986. Canada has never been a host. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Pope Francis sends a message to athletes and soccer fans taking part in the World Cup beginning in Russia tomorrow.
Possa questa importante manifestazione sportiva diventare occasione di incontro.
Francis says he hopes the sporting event will be an opportunity for peace and dialogue between different nations and religions. The Pope is a soccer fan himself. He made the remarks during his weekly audience with pilgrims and tourists. And finally tonight, 2 religious communities in Ohio produce a parody of the hit song Hello by Adele, and it's gone viral.
Hello from the Oreos, protected by the Beotogos.
The nuns in white are from the Western Rite Latin Catholic Church, and the ones in black are from the Eastern Byzantine Rite. They sing about Oreo cookies, saying unlike the treat, they should not be separated. The mock lyrics also include breathing with both lungs, a reference to St. John Paul II's desire for Christian unity between East and the West. It's nice to see those sisters singing together, even if it is just about Oreo cookies. And with that, that concludes our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. We leave you with a look at celebrations in Fatima, Portugal this week for today's feast of St. Anthony. Good night, and God bless.
When we want something, St. Anthony, he was a real great saint.
Hoje é dia de festa na cidade, Lisboa vai para a rua para cantar.